that, as Michael said, I love it the best when people dive in with questions, because if you're thinking it, someone else definitely is. So hands up if you have any. There are 5 main steps to creating a killer creative brief. The first is about kind of defining the space that you're in. So setting your business objective. What is it that you are like commercially trying to achieve with this? And identify the problem you need to solve. So why are you here? Why are you doing this piece of work? The second is defining your target audience. So working out who you're talking to and what's going on in their world. And then finding your opportunity within that target audience. So where is the space for your brand and your creative idea to be really different and really exciting from what everyone else is doing? The third part is uncovering the human truth, as we've called it, which is finding that thing that people believe is, you know, really underpins their behavior. And that when they see it, they kind of go, oh, yeah, I know that sounds really, really minor, but that click of being like, oh yeah, that is how I feel is exactly what you want to go for. And then framing the task so that you're super clear on how to get where you're going. The fourth part is setting your key message. So if people were to walk away from your ad, what is the one thing you want them to understand, and where you'll broadcast it. So making sure that you choose the right direction and the right place for your creative idea to live. And then the fifth part, which is kind of where the magic happens, is creating your idea and deciding how to measure its success. So if that's all clear to you guys, first up, what is a creative brief? So we've defined it as a blueprint for your in-house creative team or agency. So whether you're kind of briefing externally to an agency or you're trying to achieve this in-house, these are all really good rules for you to understand and work by. What we'll do is outline kind of the key objectives for the campaign. It also helps you guide creative direction. So is this thing actually going to move my brand in the right direction, or is it going to take me somewhere super fun, but actually not very useful? And centering it around a singular challenge as well. So what is it that your brand is actually trying to tackle? You are more than welcome to take notes. I myself am a note taker, but you will be given a template at the end. If you want this presentation, please just ask us. And I think you'll get the video as well afterwards. So there's no need to take notes unless you fancy it. I'm going to pass back to Michael now, I think, who's going to do the part that the client normally does.
Yeah, we're going to ping pong a little bit today. I'm kind of role playing the client. And in this case, we're going to tell the story of Fever Tree, but we'll come on to that. But first and foremost, so setting your business objective, you know, when it comes to creating any creative idea, really, or putting money behind a campaign, one of the really important things to think about kind of to yourself is what that campaign is meant to deliver, both to your brand, but really to your business commercially. And we've kind of broken down that, you know, these are 3 examples, there are more, but of how a brand could think, okay, what is this campaign going to deliver back to my business? So if you're a brand that's looking to get into more households, it might be about kind of driving the penetration of your brand. If your brand kind of has a close competitor, for example, that they're looking to either pick away at, or chip away at, or overtake, you know, your commercial objective might be about stealing market share from them. Or if you're kind of launching a new product idea, maybe you have a new NPD, your campaign objective might be about driving kind of new sales potential or new sales revenue around trying a product for the first time. So it's really important that you not only define kind of what the commercial goal is, but you set that objective with a metric. So it's not just, I want to drive penetration, but how much penetration? You want to steal share. How much share might you be looking to steal from your nearest competitor? And basically the importance of that clarity at the start helps you define things like, you know, the creative development process, which includes the messaging. So if, for example, you're trying to steal share, which Fever Tree is, we'll come on to in a second, you might look to kind of brief your creative to ensure it has like a competitive claim within it. Or if you're trying to drive trial, you might deliver a strong benefit focused message for example, that might get that product rotating off the shelves quicker. The media channels is the third kind of important part here. And if you're looking to get into more households and drive penetration with a particular audience, it might be that you need a particular suite of channels of broadcast media that's going to allow that reach of your campaign to hit households to the extent that you need it to. If it's about driving trial, it might be about investing more heavily in-store, and setting the media strategy behind your campaign really will always ladder back to the overall commercial objectives that you're setting from the start. So we wanted to start by saying that everything will ladder back to your business objective, because the reason why you invest in a campaign is ultimately to drive your brand, which drives your commercials, your revenue.
What sits right underneath that then is identifying the problem you need to solve. So, okay, you want to make more people aware of your brand, in the next 6 months, you want to go up by 10% or whatever. If that's your objective, what's your problem? Is it that people kind of see your brand but never remember it? What's getting in the way of your growth, and what's kind of stopping your business from evolving? That could be, a certain group is not kind of picking up enough momentum for you, so you're struggling a lot with a younger group, for example. People aren't thinking of your product when they go into store. There's a behavioral problem where they're not quite making the most of your product. One of your competitors has gone off the wall and has done something really crazy, which has shaken everything up that you need to adapt to, that kind of stuff. Crystallizing that problem really clearly means that you can have a lot more direction further down the line. If you know what you're trying to solve, it's much clearer what you have to make to solve it. And when we get down to actually creating the creative idea, you can then use this problem as a lens to understand which creative idea is strongest. Does it actually solve this problem that I said was the main problem to solve?
And so when thinking about a brand like Fever-Tree, throughout kind of the webinar today, we're going to take you kind of on the journey of Fever-Tree, which many of us probably are users of Fever-Tree if we like a G&T. I certainly do. Their premium tonic water for those of us who don't. And we're basically going to show you how they could have kind of used the steps that follow to develop one of their more recent campaigns. As Saoirse alluded to, it's all about thinking about the problem which they're trying to solve. And so in their particular category, a really kind of adjacent category to them is premium spirits, which they noticed were growing really, really quickly. And it was fueled by the surge that we've all seen in kind of the trend around health consciousness, paying more attention to kind of what you're putting inside of you, what you're eating and drinking every day. And they noticed that, well, wow, consumers are really willing to pay more for spirits, but they're still mixing their G&T with Schweppes. So there's a gap in the market for a tonic water to be as premium, as aspirational, and as good tasting as a good gin. So from a business perspective, the campaign idea that Fever-Tree would have started with, their commercial objective would be a market share gain on Schweppes. So here, we'll come back to this a few times, but from here on out, in the back of your mind, think about how would I develop a campaign idea if I was Fever-Tree that would steal share from Schweppes? And it all starts with defining your target audience and the opportunity.
It most certainly does, Michael. Sorry, I always do that very strange sort of, as almost as though I'm hosting as, Chris Tarrant. Anyone know Chris Tarrant? Anyway, defining your target audience. There's 4 main ways to do this. So one is location, segmenting people by their kind of location or their geography. That one's very obvious. Knowing which region or city or, whether they live in an urban or a rural environment helps you to understand a bit more about what their life will be like. If they're from Ireland or England, I know that seems like a subtle difference, but being of Irish descent, it's not. There are some quite big nuances there. Whether you live in a rural environment or an urban one means that you have quite a different daily life. The actual routines you go through look quite different. The next is demographics. So segmenting people based on their personal characteristics. age, gender, occupation, socioeconomic standing, all that kind of stuff. Those allow you to kind of understand, again, a bit more. So if they are a manual worker, as one of our brands looks at, they are much more, that, you know, they get up at 5 a.m. to go to work, and their lunch break is normally at 11 a.m. When it comes to things like media targeting, that's so important, because if you're trying to get them at lunch, their lunch is at 11. If you start targeting when your lunch is, you're going to miss them. Lifestyle as well is a really big one. So segmenting people based on their mindset, their hobbies, their character, their values. I think a really interesting example of this is Gen Z. I know we all speak about them a lot, but they have a really strong independent streak and a desire to sort of be self-sustaining, as it were, in their lives. They don't like to depend on anyone else. That's critical. If you're thinking about your brand's tone of voice, if you're trying to appeal to Gen Z, appealing to that independent streak, which means they want to be free of their parents and free of dependency, is really important. Behaviors then, so based on how they actually behave towards the products or the brands. So are they users, non-users, occasions, that kind of stuff? You know, are they people who actually skip lunch all the time? So if you're looking to get them, you should go for the afternoon snack, for example. Fever Tree, pulling our Fever Tree example through everything, are targeting urban women and men, so they don't have a sort of a gender push, although more women, I'm sure, tend to purchase them. But they're very much centered in urban areas, which gives them sort of a very modern feel that they go for. Age 24 to 39, so they're not going for super, super young, but gin can often be quite an older group, not meaning to point any fingers. So they're going for what is comparatively quite a young group for gin and mixers. And they're very much, as Michael said, in the premium area. So people are really eating and drinking it for pleasure. It's not one that you tend to knock back out of necessity, although if you're doing that, you do have a different set of issues. That's not what we're solving here. So finding your opportunity. What you need to understand is what your customers feel and think right now. So what is their baseline? What do they think of your category? What do they think of your brand? If they think that your brand is very accessible, so it's really easy to use, it's really consistent, they are pretty familiar with it, it's relevant, it gives them what they need, that's all good, but it's very rational. And lots of brands that we see that are starting up often tend to be more rational than they are emotional. If you look at the 16 drivers here that we use at ProQuo, the bottom 8 are rational and the top are emotional. So as the owner of that brand, I then start to think, right, where is the space for my brand to be different? Like, how do I want to really change the way they think? Go on to the next one, please. So if your brand is strongly rational at the bottom, and if your category, people are expecting very rational things from you, you can then say, right, where am I going to punch through? Am I going to make my brand really innovative? So is it going to be forward thinking, very modern, very relevant? Or am I going to go for integrity and tell an ingredient story and be really honorable about everything I put in there? Where are you going to find your space, and how do you want to change the way people feel about you? Being clear on what that behavior shift is means that you will be able to create an idea that will aim towards shifting it more effectively.
And here I come back with the sideshow of Fever Tree. So we've looked at the Fever Tree brand through kind of each of those different drivers. And as you'd expect, the green is what they're doing well. The red is what they're doing least well. The paler shades of green fall closer to the top, and the paler shades of red fall closer to the bottom. So here, kind of at a glance, remember Fever Tree want to steal market share from Schweppes. So you can see that their kind of strength within their brand is in their kind of top left area, their attraction, their aspiration, their innovation, and their performance, which in this case would be taste. So as Fever Tree, kind of knowing where you stand is really important, but also as Saoirse explained, it's really important to know kind of what people feel is important from the category and what's being delivered within the category, and therefore where maybe you might position yourself to win within the category. So we'll just show you kind of what Fever Tree looks like inside of our platform for a second. And it's the same colors that you just saw from the previous slide on the left here, where we've got Fever Tree's kind of look and feel. And you can see again in the top left corner, emotional seduction kind of being their wheelhouse. When you look at the right, here we're looking at the category importance of tonic waters. So when we ask people how they feel about tonics, what do they feel that they need most from that category, you actually see that it is indeed quite rational. It's actually quite rationally persuasive. You see the bottom right lit up. We see this quite a lot because oftentimes the market leaders tend to drive how people feel about categories. So if you were to look at Schweppes, you'd see a very similar picture to the picture that's on the right. So if Fever Tree is trying to steal share from Schweppes, what they're able to see here is where their strengths are, which is in emotional seduction, and also kind of where Schweppes' strengths are, where the category's kind of strengths are, which is in kind of rational persuasion. And to chip away at a market leader like Schweppes, they'd want to look at what people need from the category and also flex where they're different and where they can disrupt. So we'll come on to explaining how that could be. But I wanted to give you a peek at Schweppes as well before we do. So let's take a look at one more chart just to set the stage. So in this chart, you've got Fever Tree indexed across the middle, and you've got Schweppes and Fentimans actually indexed off of it. Schweppes is in red and Fentimans is in green. So if I was the brand manager of Fever Tree, I could see immediately kind of where my competitive strength is, and that's what's outlined in green. Furthest to the right, we've got things like differentiation, aspiration, innovation. You can see attraction, and you can also see that they're really competitive on performance with Schweppes, which is remarkable for Schweppes being such a big brand. So they're doing what's really kind of most important in the category, which is a great taste, quite well, but their disruption opportunity to really chip away and carve out their own space and maybe even steal share from Schweppes comes in their aspiration, their differentiation, and their innovation. So let's see how they could use that insight, that level of detail to their advantage. Saoirse, I'll pass it back to you to talk through the human truth and framing the task.
Certainly. So it might sound a bit lame, human truth, bear with us, because what you need to find is the thing that really resonates with your consumers. So what we've done so far is establish what the business objective is, what the problem you're solving is, who you're going to go after, and where the market space is. That's all great. That's kind of like setting the stage and understanding like what North Star you're following. This is the part where you start to understand how are we going to solve for this? So looking at the target group that you've identified and keeping the problem sort of in the back of your mind, what you need to do is find what is common to this group but not obvious. So an example is, off the top of my head now, old ladies like to drink tea together. Okay, they often get together and have tea. That's not an unexpected truth. It's true of all of them, sure, but it's not like unexpected, it's not exciting. All old women get together and swap teacups when they drink their tea. Not true, but if it was, that's really interesting, because then you can start to say, right, okay, that's something that people will instantly recognize to be very true, but they might not have really thought it through ever before. So it's not obvious. It's not even obvious to them sometimes. And if you can nail what that is, your brand will immediately be seen as more relevant and more exciting to these people. People will feel really seen and understood by you if you can get this human truth right. They'll feel like you're a very empathetic brand. So to do this, look at established behaviors around the way that they use your product. For this, it could be a little thing that you play on, or it could be a big thing, obviously. looking at the major shifts that they're experiencing in their everyday lives. So is there anything that would lead to a new need? Is there anything, any trend that's happened that's causing them to do something slightly different or think slightly differently? Another way to explore this is to look at any cultural phenomenon that they're surrounded by. So is there anything going on in their world? Is there like the zeitgeist for them? What's happening? And is any of it relevant or interesting to the way they use your category or your brand? Trying to find out what kind of underpins everything here is really important. The example using Fever Tree for this is that for their latest campaign, I'm sure you've all seen it, it caused quite an uproar, is that they observed that it was very highly personal, the amount of gin versus tonic that you put in a drink. I don't know about you guys, I had my brother make one for me a few weeks ago. It was like 90% gin and I almost died. Whereas my mum made me one a few weeks before that and it was like 10% gin and I was like, why am I drinking water here? What's going on? It's really personal to you what like kind of level you put in there. It's kind of reflective of who you are. My brother's at university, just for anyone who's wondering, he's okay. That causes a lot of like family arguments about what the balance is between the two. So what they understood was the different, there's a tension there and an argument which no one's really tapped into. It's a well-known thing, but no one really talks about it. So they identified that and made it the center point of their creative idea, which we'll keep exploring.
Thanks, Serge. We're gonna briefly touch on then framing the task, like what's the task at hand? And we look at this through kind of the get to buy framework. So it's where kind of three elements of the upfront section of the brief kind of come together, which is your target audience. In this case, we were talking about 24 to 39-year-old men and women in urban areas that kind of ate and drank for pleasure. To do something, so to deliver something commercially back to your brand. In this case, it's about stealing share from Schweppes. And then how, so that was kind of the market analysis that we did, looking at the drivers of the category, the drivers of Schweppes and Fentimans versus how people currently feel about Fever Tree and where their kind of ownership lies. And framing the task really then helps a creative and basically start to say, okay, what is the objective of this campaign actually trying to do for the client that's briefing it? So if I was to think about the Fever Tree example, again, it's about market share, the target audience. So get 24 to 39-year-old urban dwellers to choose Fever Tree over Schweppes, which is your steal share, by driving our aspiration and our tonic water's premium taste. So you saw their disruption opportunity was in kind of that aspiration section where they were edging out Schweppes, and their premium taste was that performance measure that was the most important in the category that they were very competitive on. Serge, anything that you want to build on this, like coming from an agency perspective around how important it is to kind of get this part right before we go on to the execution side of it?
Yeah, I think what we've been doing so far is, as I said, kind of setting that North Star. What this get to buy does is kind of like, to mix analogies, your scaffolding. So it's a bit like where are the, oh, I'm going to mix analogies again. What are the lines that you color within? You're kind of drawing it out now. The creative idea will be kind of the meat on the bones, but this is just kind of where do we need to be playing, kind of bringing it all together into one place. It's really important to try and do this for your agency because, or if you're doing it yourself, it's also important because it kind of draws all of that big thinking into one place.
Thanks. All right, now potentially the most important part, isn't it? Setting the key message, that single important point to communicate, and then figuring out where the hell you're going to put it.
Exactly. So one of, as Michael says, the most important things to do is have a single key message. I think what's really hard is that as you're kind of assembling all of these truths, there's so many different things that you could say. There's so many different sort of places you could say things. There's messages which are obviously really important. There's somewhere you're like, oh, we could put that in, like that would be in there too. The more messages that you put into an ad or into a communication of any sort, the less people are going to take from it. I would say that almost every piece of communication can take one message. There are some which are slightly longer or have slightly more dwell time that can take two, but try and be really single-minded. If people were going to walk away from this, what is the one thing you want them to remember? The single thing. So some examples are whether it's about the product or how it's used. So Bounty really quickly picks you up. Is it what the benefit of using the brand? You know, Red Bull gives you energy, very famously translated creatively as Red Bull gives you wings. But obviously the strategy that sits behind that is Red Bull gives you so much energy, you feel like you can fly. Or you know, turning category norms or established trends on their head. So Dove stands for real beauty in a category where beauty was about enhancing and changing and covering up. They took a stand and said, we want to be about real women, for example. So what's that single message that you want to communicate? What do you want to say about your brand? Underneath that, there can then be, it's good to have some reasons to believe. So some kind of evidence that what you've said isn't total nonsense. So Dove stands for real beauty, for example. They use real women in their campaigns. They use good quality ingredients in their products, supposedly. There's things that they do which evidence real, and they talk about them in their ads. So what are the things that sit underneath it which prove that that single message is true? They can be quite functional or they can be quite emotional. The example with Fever Tree is going back to that, how much gin or tonic is there in a drink? On average, 75% of a drink is the mixer. So of all that you're drinking, it's much more important that you have a good mixer than it is a good gin. So that's the single point that they communicated. 75% of drink is the mixer on average. And Fever Tree is the best tasting mixer out there. Once you've kind of thought about that, one of the next questions which comes up is decide where you'll broadcast it. There are a few things which come into play here. One is, where is your audience? Are they on TikTok? Are they on Snapchat? Are they on Instagram? Are they in the cinema? You know, I'm sure we don't have cinema budgets, but where are they? And where do they feel the most relaxed and the most comfortable? Accessing them in the place where they are very receptive to your message is best. So that's one thing. Where actually are they? The second is, once we get to the creative idea portion, where best suits your creative idea? If you've come up with sort of a 3D model, the best place for that isn't social media, perhaps. Maybe it's an actual live execution in a train station or something. You've got to think about where suits the creative idea that you've had. If it's a really lively, exciting, visually dramatic idea, maybe TikTok is the right place for it. If it's slightly more thoughtful and slightly more, or maybe even slightly more provocative and antagonistic, maybe the best place for it is Twitter. So thinking about what suits the idea that you've had, what channel suits the idea you've had. So you, at this point, start to think about where you'll broadcast it. You can have some ideas in your mind. Just be ready to amend them slightly when you get to the creative section if you need to. So here's the magic bit, creating your idea and deciding how to measure its success. Creative ideas are very complicated to create. But there are three main things to think about when you're developing one. What is it that you're hearing? So what are you telling people? It needs to be motivating, it needs to be interesting, it needs to be really clear. If you're saying something in a way that people have heard before or your competitors talk about or is very normal for your category, I can almost guarantee you no one will listen. They might hear it, but they'll forget it. So even if you're going to say the same thing that they've heard 100 times before, work really hard to express it in a way that feels and sounds very different to what they've heard before. If there's any lack of clarity in that message as well, it will probably be misunderstood. So go and talk to everyone you know, whatever it is that, like, do do a bit of a, like I always tell my mum, for example, if she doesn't understand it, it's not clear enough. My mum's not stupid, just to be clear. She just is a consumer. What you see is the next part. So what are you showing people? Whatever they're going to see on their screen, I think a lot of the media that we buy today is on social. I don't need to tell you that it's very competitive out there because everything is an image. Every influencer is trying to be interesting. Every one of your mates is trying to be interesting. Every brand is trying to be interesting. So you need to think about what will truly represent who your brand is, what kind of visual will reinforce your key message, and what will actually get people's attention. Looking for visuals which kind of are very impactful, whether that's through the design or whether the video or picture is really unusual. You know, even like starting the video upside down would get people's attention, you know, even a small trick like that, do something a bit weird. The third part is kind of sits above those other two, which is how your creative idea actually reflects your brand. So taking a step back, the ad needs to feel like it really represents the brand. It really needs to show your values, show your tone of voice. If your brand was a person, this is them talking. So who are you? Making sure that you're really clearly representing and reflecting who you are means that whether or not people get the key message, they will have an impression of your brand. If you can tie that really strong key message into a really strong brand personality as well, you are absolutely winning because they will leave with a sense of who your brand is and a key message. Is that all clear to everyone? Oh, nodding heads. Nice. So at this point, you normally have a few ideas. You know, there's one route which has a woman walking down the road, there's another, a guy in a swimming pool, and another one that's animated or something. And at this point, you're normally like, right, okay, each one of the people in the room has come up with each idea. Everyone's a little bit like, oh, I like my one the best. People can get a little bit defensive at this point because it's really, you know, they've created something and it's difficult to do. So we need to have really clear guidelines and rules about which one to go with. This is where we go back to the business objectives and the behavior change that we've mentioned before. Looking at these ideas, which ones do you really think will change the way people see your brand and feel about your brand in the way that you want them to? Being really honest, do you think they'll do that? Then ask questions like, is the messaging really clear? Is it done in a novel way? Is it unexpected for your category and your competitors? So even bring up all of their ads that they've done in the last year and see how yours stack up against it. If it doesn't look different, if it doesn't sound different, I don't think it's passing the test. Another good test is, will people remember this in 2 weeks? Will they have remembered having seen it? If you can pass that test, you're doing very well. And then also taking a step back, if you think about who your brand is, who you know it to be, does this ad actually reflect that? You know, does this idea show who your brand really is? So we have a fever tree example here, which we'll show you, and we'll put it through the hear, see brand test in a second.
We went to the ends of the earth to find the most authentic, naturally sourced ingredients for our ginger ales, ginger beers, and tonic waters. No other company goes to these lengths to create the best drinks. And what's more, they're made with absolutely no artificial sweeteners or colours. Fever Tree. If 3/4 of your drink is the mixer, mix with the best.
So you can see that they're hitting really hard at the end there. 75% of the drink is mixer, so make sure you use ours. That's kind of the key message that they're getting across really clearly. What you're seeing is loads of provenance scenery. So you're on their farm, you know, you're following their farmers, but you're also seeing loads of refreshment cues. So you're seeing the car drive through a puddle of water, the water spraying, you're seeing them pouring it over ice, you're seeing that beautiful drink at the end. Both of those things are laddering up into taste credentials. They're basically saying we're made of delicious stuff and we're so refreshing, which is a huge driver of taste in mixers. So those messages are obviously, those two things are very complementary, the hear and the see. They have to be tied together. You have to be, what you're seeing has to reinforce what you're hearing. Then when you take a step back, the brand is very sort of calm, it's very premium, it shows innovation, you know, it shows the refreshment. So it really does reflect Fever Tree's kind of key values and their tone of voice. So this is one of the harder parts then, but it's good. It's really important to do, especially if you're managing an agency. This is the part where people start to sort of back out of the room quietly. Do not let them back out of the room, having been on the receiving end of this. You have to measure its success. Looking at your commercial goals. Oh, sorry if you can hear that. Looking at your commercial goals, will this ad deliver on those? Be super clear about what they are. Other more softer ways to look at that, apart from those objectives, are people talking more about your brand online? Whatever channel it was that you went out in, has people's engagement with your brand increased beyond what you've spent in media? Has the quality of your product reviews increased? Have you got more followers? And also, have people become less sensitive to price? That one tends to take a little while to come into play. So it might take a campaign or two, but it will happen if that's what you're aiming for. And one other way to measure success is we have a thing called Creativelab, which is very cool, which allows you to upload a creative idea into it once you've actually got to that stage to try and understand how will this idea impact my brand? Will it make me seem more aspirational? If that's what you're aiming for, you whack it in basically, and it will show you exactly how it changes the way people feel about your brand. Then you can understand, is that what I intended? Is that the right way to do it? And if not, what do I need to change? Is there anything you'd add in there, Michael?
No, Serge, I think it's perfect. I think one of the things as well, kind of in measuring success, is we've given examples, we've given soft measures of success. Commercial sales results are obviously another one on top of that, should you have them. Here on the screen is the template that we've made just from all the stuff that we've gone through today, which is built in PowerPoint, and it has just some really simple kind of form fields that you can type into. If it's helpful for you next time you're running a campaign, we would be more than happy to share it. Just like either raise your hand here so that we know who needs it, or just drop Fran a line and we can make sure that you have it. And if you'd like the slides from today, we can also share those. The brief would take probably 15 minutes to fill out and covers things from kind of your business objective through to the get to buy framework, through to the target audience, and of course, your single-minded point to communicate. And a lot of you know us by now, but Saoirse and I both work at ProQuo, so we're a brand management platform that is helping a lot of brands understand where they stand in the market and also what actions that they should be taking to grow. And so we're helping quite a lot of brands, many of which are actually within the copy clubs. We've got an event coming up with Better Nature and how they're kind of leading the tempeh category and disrupting the tempeh category. We've worked with brands like Miso Tasty and those that you see on the screen, friends with Tony's Chocolonely, Lucky Saint, and so on and so forth, that are also friends of the copy club. So if you'd like to carry on a conversation, we're of course happy to help you guys. Just get in touch with Fran, drop a line here, or shout. If you shout loud enough, I might hear you in Detroit. And what we're offering for kind of all Copy Club members as their partners are free brand awareness tracking, both at a prompted and an unprompted level within the platform. That's your brand and 4 competitors of your choice, which we can do for you as a Christmas special. So happy holidays. And with that, we've got about 15 minutes remaining for questions. If there are any on the line, I can't see because I'm screen sharing.
We haven't had any questions. We have had a Merry Christmas. which I do think is quite nice. Thank
We
you
should have
very
put
much,
Santa
Laura.
hat on you, Serge.
Merry Christmas to you too. Do you guys have any questions? You don't have to have any questions.
Yeah, guys, feel free to just shout them out if you'd rather.
I'm doing
Sign of a good presentation, isn't it? If I've got no questions.
That's very kind of you, Michelle. It can go one way or the other, I have to say. On silence.
I'm feeling very bad now that I sent a creative brief this morning that is definitely really subpar after hearing this, but good for next time. So thanks for that.
Is there anyone here today that's currently like working on a campaign for 2021? Don't be shy.
Yes, a small one.
Yeah.
I think you know about one.
Yes. The Jolly Hog is a fantastic brand.
You've got to love sausages.
Oh, sorry. We do have a question from Sarah. How do you get clients to create a full brief as well as you have described? This is the part where I'm going to try and not be rude to clients generally, but I once received a 30-page brief from one of my clients, which I found completely overwhelming. No one needs that much information on anything. I think it's about setting up a really clear dynamic between the two of you. So agencies work slightly differently. They might need slightly different inputs. This is a good guide to that covers everything. But working with them to understand what it is they need from you to get a good brief, like extra from this. And you also telling them what it is they need to know. So if there is something that you don't know where to fit into the structure, but you feel could be really interesting for them, obviously also include it. But I think the objective is to not let any, to not deviate too far from this structure, because I think it's very easy once you're thinking through it to kind of lose discipline. And that's when things start to sort of diverge and it becomes a lot harder to control. Yeah, Michelle said create a template for them to complete. That's what I normally tend to do as well. I mean, you can give them the template that we'll give you as well.
Hi, I have a question. At the moment, whilst it's not where I'm planning to stay, I am in a B2B role, and I am kind of constantly trying to force stakeholders within the business to kind of follow this sort of template. And one of the things that people really struggle with is kind of audience personas and lifestyle, like the bit around sort of demographics and lifestyle and behaviors from a B2B point of view. Like they're just like, oh, well, they work in these companies. And I struggle to get people to think about personas and how we can really reach people in the right way. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the critical thing to think about there is what is it that those people need? Because it's very easy to look at, I mean, the demographic stuff becomes less important because the main thing is about what their job is. That's fine. What is it that those people actually need to do their job well? What are their hopes? What are their fears? Kind of an exercise about what motivates them. If you can look into those things, then I think you get a much richer picture about the lives that they lead and what lives that they lead and what they're trying to achieve. Like, what would they love to be able to say and what would they hate to say the most? I think that tends to be a useful exercise.
It's a really interesting one, Catherine, as well, because the B2B world is quite different than the B2C in terms of how you're presenting kind of your product. And I think to Serge's point around motivations, even looking at, if your product or service is for different levels of individuals within the same company. It's like a CMO versus a assistant brand manager versus a head of marketing, whatever. They're going to have very different motivations. And so understanding kind of what the benefits are of your product and mapping those benefits or features of your product to their motivations, and still kind of holding yourself accountable to being single-minded to that individual. It might just be, you might just have a few different, you call them personas. It could be personas or targets or whatever we call them. but it is equally important to understand what motivates them, what benefit does your product deliver to kind of ease that tension and service them, and then how do you maintain that single-mindedness in your communication to that individual. Yeah, does that help?
Yeah, definitely. I know it's something we've obviously spoken about briefly before, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I have a quick question about personas, actually. It might be a unique scenario, but I've worked with CMOs who love customer personas. And then I've worked with CMOs who are very resistant to the idea of them. I think the quote was, "I don't believe in customer personas," which for me was like, because I'm very customer centric, was a surprise. But do you have any tips for sort of breaking down that resistant barrier to taking the time and energy to creating the personas?
Definitely. I think the main thing is to understand what's blocking them on personas, because I also have a problem with personas if they're done in a certain way, because you can create, you know, Hayley, 42, lives in Shropshire and does gardening on Wednesdays. Okay, but like, how am I going to use that? What does that actually mean? So I think it's what is there a problem with personas that it feels like a self-indulgent exercise, which it occasionally can be? Because if so, then the reassurance needs to be around, we're building it so that we can understand what they're going to enjoy in communications and what they're going to find useful. There's no arguing with that really, unless they're being really irrational. But understanding who you're trying to talk to in order to create a message which suits them better is like just good common sense and strategy. So I normally think that the persona thing tends to be a block about having been burned one too many times with personas which aren't actionable. Thumbs up.
It's interesting. I heard a technology and marketing futurist talking the other day about how there's no longer like one Carl or one David out there who fits a persona, and there's now thousands and thousands of Carls, and our user behavior isn't able to be sort of like slotted into generations as much as it could before, because early adopters can cover different generations, things like that. So it is interesting to see how that might change in the future.
Exactly. And I think that's why the human truth part is so important, because if you can find a truth that is well recognized but undervalued in that group, whatever they might be, then you're really onto winner. And that's actually more important to get right. The target audience is really important for media targeting and for understanding who you're going to. But for the actual creative idea, the value of it is guiding, finding that human truth. So it's more interesting to go for a group that is defined in the way that is useful to you, rather than like women 24 to 55.
For me, it's actually food groups. So like people with intolerances or follow that specific diets. And I've almost segmented customers based on their needs as a vegan, their needs as somebody with a gluten intolerance, their needs. And I don't know if that's the right way to do it. It's the way I've certainly gone, the route I've gone down, but it seems the most logical because they have got, based on consumer research that I've done, they have different motivations, different challenges to overcome, different sensitivities. So that's the route I've taken. I don't know. It'd be interesting to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they'll all have very different behaviors as well around. I mean, I'm intolerant, and for the first few, I was diagnosed when I was about 8. But for the first few years, whenever I went to a restaurant when I was a teenager, people would be like, "We'll get you the low fat option," and I'd be like, that's not my problem. I'm like 14. I'm not on a diet. But that's a peculiarity of being intolerant from quite a young age. That's very specific. You know, a vegan would have a different set of challenges that they go through in their eating habits. So I think it is the right way to go about it. The important thing is then understanding how much budget you have to create specific comms for each one when it comes to the creative brief. So if you lay out what all their motivations are, it might be that there's a motivation that strings through all of them, that if you play on it right, will actually work for each one. And if not, probably size those audiences and choose which ones are the most important to you, rather than making it blander. Yeah.
I think there are current themes throughout them all, but also individual and nuances. So that's really helpful advice. Thank you.
Pleasure.
My biggest challenge is like actually getting to that kind of human truth part. I am on the B2B side of things as well, and I really struggle to like pin down our audience base and get insight from them. Like we can't like survey them, they just don't respond. It's estate agents. I work at Zoopla, but like it's really hard to get them to respond. Like we tend to get our insight from our sales team mostly, but they're quite kind of like biased in that they know the product inside out, and they're almost just saying like our product is better because of this, and I don't believe that to be true. Like so if you had any advice of like ways to reach the audience to understand their truth, like that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, salespeople, I think, will always, they have to believe that, don't they? They're selling it.
Yeah.
It's actually good that they're convinced. It means they're probably doing a good job. To get to the B2B audience, something that I've done previously is rather than go and try and survey and get loads of them, because I think what you're trying to do in that instance, similar to the question before, is really understand what motivates them. Like, what do they care about? Like, what are the small things that tell them that they've done a good job? And what are the small things which show them that they're not doing that well? So to get there, I would almost say, just if you can get hold of a couple, do some really in-depth interviews and just like ask them loads of questions to try and feel out exactly why they're motivated by that. And that will, I think, then help to sort of weed out what their aspirations are and what their fears are, which will help create a much more robust sort of understanding of the target group.
Yeah.
Would you add anything in, Michael? Or?
No, I think it is tough, but I think the qualitative side of it, when there's less kind of availability, is definitely the way to go. And you might even realize that there are some consistent tensions that you're uncovering when you do that kind of at a small scale. And the benefit of it is that you can do that quite quickly. You can do that virtually, and you can do that either independently or, you know, in pairs or in small groups. I think having a consistent approach through each of those interviews would be a really important thing, so that you're asking kind of similar questions to the different individuals and be able to see the similarities and differences between them. But it is a tough challenge kind of in the B2B space when you're dealing with professionals rather than consumers. It's a different challenge.
Yeah, and we're finding like there's very different kind of motivations on the decision maker versus user side. Like primarily the people that are at the front end of our products, their aspiration is to not be in an estate agency. So in which case, what is their motivation? But I think that point about what tells them whether they're doing a good job or not doing a good job, that's a very kind of good thing, because that's like an immediate task-based thing that I can establish. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And that question again about what is the thing that you would most like would you hate to say, or what is the thing that you most want to be able to say to your boss? I think that one normally gets quite a good response too.
Yeah,
Michael?
It's very good to Catherine's question as well, and figuring out kind of who are the different targets or the different, you know, individuals that you're looking to speak with. And we notice, at least on the ProQuo side, that there are different people that we're working with. We work with heads of marketing, we work with sales individuals, we work with CMOs, we work with assistant brand managers and brand managers, and all of those motivations are different. All of the pressures that they're feeling are different, and they're shaped by their business. And so it is important to go around and understand from a product perspective, how do each of these individuals in the B2B world see my product? And therefore, what do I want to present them with that's actually going to ease and make their life easier? So yeah, I can empathize with that kind of working in the B2B space too.
Thank you.
Right, fab. Thank you, guys. It's 5 o'clock now, and I'm sure after that lots of us are now craving a G&T, so I won't keep you for too long. Thank you both so much, Sasha, Michael, for giving us that, and everyone else, thank you so much for coming. I will send round all of the information that you need. afterwards. And if you would like to find out more about Proco, then just pop me a message or Michael, and I'm sure they will be more than happy to give you a spin through the platform, as I find it very fabulous. So yeah, thank you guys. Have a lovely evening.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank
Lovely
you
to
very
meet you all.
much.
Guys,
Thank you guys.
That was great.
Bye
have a
guys.
great day.